morning and happy Memorial Day. And we say that. I always wonder why we say happy Memorial Day because for those who have lost someone, this is not a happy day. This is a day of remembrance. And so I hope that's what we're doing today, is remembering those who have given their lives for our country. It's important that we remember that. We are ASMM Digital Small Business Connections. We're the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. Our goal each and every week is to give you something you can walk away with. My goal is to give you something that you call your chief operating officer or your lead assistant and say, oh my God, you have to listen to this. That's my goal, because that's what happens to my favorite podcasts. I listen to them and I call Anastasia and say, oh my gosh, you've got to listen to this. So that's my goal for you. When we're getting started, or before we get started, I want to talk about something I've been thinking a lot about this weekend. I get a lot of phone calls from people about marketing. And one of the things that I realize is they call me prematurely. They call me before they've handled the low-hanging fruit. So I want you to think about the things that you've been told over and over again that you should do, and you haven't. That could be wrapping your van. It could be joining a networking group. It could be joining a BNI group. It could be joining or filling out your profile on these groups that you already belong to so that people can find you online. Whatever that low-hanging fruit is, I want you to stop, take a minute, and do those things. And I also want to say to you, you can subscribe to our newsletter. Message me, actually, wherever you're watching this, message me. I'll send you a way to get onto that list. This week's newsletter is all about low-hanging fruit, and I give you at least 5 examples of things you can do right now to help people see you faster. So let's get into what we're doing. We are live streaming today, and we are talking to Eric Reed from the Read 5 group, and from actually, you said the Read 5 podcast, is that correct? Take 5 podcast.
Yeah, well, actually, we call it. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. And the podcast is the Rethink Marketing podcast. We just call it Take 5. We call it Rethink Marketing, etc. But it's the Rethink. It's Take 5, the Rethink Marketing podcast.
Okay, I'm going to definitely subscribe to that. I'm really excited about it.
I appreciate it.
So, Eric, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, so I've come up in sales and marketing through my career, really on the media side. I started in the alternative news network. I did not ask you and where you were from. Where are you from? Like what part of the country are you from?
I'm in Maryland. I'm on the East Coast.
Okay, yeah. So actually,
how about you?
Well, I'm in Cincinnati, but the Baltimore City paper was one of the publications that I ran sales and marketing in that alternative news group, Detroit Metro Times, Nuvo News Weekly in Indianapolis, etc. But I came up through sales and marketing in media on that side. And really in that environment, learn the importance of culture, building teams, just how a square doesn't always fit in a square, et cetera. That,
Right.
The things we know now, but maybe known truths, I guess, is something that maybe we just took for granted. But I came up through that, went to work after quite a long period in that space. I did some startup stuff working with high tech sales and marketing teams, and then got back into media with Gannett, USA Today, et cetera. So I've been in media, I've been in sales and marketing. Read 5 Group is just a culmination of all that, where I kind of thought at my age, 53, kids getting out of college, I just wanted to be more in that partner relationship with a lot of clients I've dealt with over my career.
Okay. All right. Well, so let's talk about culture, because this is a huge topic. It's been a huge topic for a long time. I think it's even more important now. Right. Yeah. We're coming back from a crazy year. How are we going to, first of all, tell me what culture clutter is, and then we'll talk about what's happening now.
So first of all, we joke a lot. Colin Jeffries is someone that I do the podcast with, and we joke a lot about, man, you can't get to a blog, you can't read a newsletter you get, you can't just be out there consuming information about business, sales, and marketing and not get hit with culture. I mean, it's something that people talk about, but I don't think we really understand what it is or what it can be, I think is a better way to say it. So, culture is what culture isn't. It isn't imposed on your organization or on your team. It's nurtured from the bottom up. Rules and guidelines and directives that your company has or that you have for your department, those are pushed down, and then your culture functions within those, and your team, your employees, your whoever you're working with, that's built from the ground up because that's what they have to function in. Now you have a right to agree with it or not agree with it and want to tweak it to fit your company vision, but it's something that has to be nurtured and everybody's involved with it. So what culture clutter is what it kind of says. It's a cluttering of not having a defined culture. If you don't have a defined culture, then everybody's kind of elaborating on what they think the culture is on the very vague guidelines. And then you've got 20 different cultures if you have 20 employees, 100 different cultures if you have 100 employees, and we get what's called a culture clutter. Now, is that a problem? I think it is, because if you're not on a clear, concise culture and on a clear vision, you can't succeed. And so I just think that we take for granted, oh yeah, we have a good culture. I allow people to come in 10 minutes late. I allow, if they need to, we wear t-shirts on Thursday. We have a juice bar, a ping pong table. Yeah, that's not culture. I mean, that's maybe a good environment. Maybe that's a relaxed human environment, but that's not what we mean when we talk about culture.
Okay. All right. Well, then how do we create it? There's, and let's go back because we did talk about doing this. Right now, we've got people who, I'll use my company for an example.
Yeah.
There's only 5 of us.
Mm-hmm.
We had this great filling in our office. The way we worked together was wonderful. And then COVID hit and we all went home, and we've been working from home. And actually, interestingly, we've kind of been working from across the country because I work with a bunch of moms who were able to do that.
Yeah.
And so we've been working from across the country, and now we're talking about coming back. So there's this whole situation happening where we've got to rethink who we are and what we will be. So talk a little bit about that, creating culture, but also recreating culture.
So the first thing in both of those examples or both of those scenarios is what's called a North Star metric. So you can't create a positive, you can't create a culture that is meaningful if you don't have everybody. You've got to find this metric, this North Star metric that everybody can buy into. So, in an organ, sales is focused on the number. Well, that doesn't mean something to human resources. That doesn't necessarily mean something to marketing or to the other departments. So a North Star metric when you're creating a culture is that finding that one thing that everybody can be connected with. It could be orders, it could be phone calls, it could be something that everybody understands that this is a measurement that we know if we're succeeding or failing, being mediocre or excelling or need to improve. And so the first thing is just getting that North Star metric. And how does that tie to culture? Why is that important? Because it's attitudinal. A culture is about understanding that because what you want is people buying in and there for the long haul. You don't want people feeling like organization doesn't care. You don't want them out looking for jobs. Your community cares about your culture because they like to do business with people that they like, and they like to engage with people who feel good and positive about their job. We're not talking about creating nirvana and having this unrealistic atmosphere where you don't do business. You're not in a mindset of a serious business mindset, but culture that's defined can exist within that. And so to go to your, there lies the challenge, right? Because you come into an office, and many companies were virtual before this COVID, but let's just take that example where you come into an office, there's kind of these things that happen where there are these transparent meetings of where revenue's at, what we're doing, the North Star metric, we look at that, et cetera. So maybe that's challenged with having to go remote, but it's not to simplify it, but the reality is with all the technology with Zoom and the way that we're talking here right now, there's plenty of avenues to create that really intimate relationship. I mean, in all seriousness, we're about 16 inches in front of each other. I mean, you're in the East Coast, I'm here in Cincinnati, but I feel like I'm sitting in the room with you. So I think that intimacy and that relationship exists. And that's really the two key components to maintaining the communication side of good culture.
Right. That makes sense. I will say, as you were saying this, I was thinking about the people in my office. I was thinking about some of the things that you can't do this way. Some examples. If we do a lot in our space, we have a marketing company, but we also run a suicide prevention charity. And once in a while, I will personally get a call from somebody who wants to share their story. And sometimes these stories are horrific and they are gutting. And the people in my office will see after that call that I get up and I go for a walk.
Yeah.
And so they'll know the rest of the day, okay, this is what's happening in Anne's world. Her world has shifted from our marketing to how she's going to change this. And we see those things where we don't necessarily see them when we're virtual.
Mm-hmm.
So it is there is a space there. And just so you know, I am actually all for the virtual thing. I love it, but there is that space that I'm having to admit is there.
Yeah, I would rather be in front of people, engaging in the human activities that we engage prior to this, and I think, and I certainly think, and in all honesty, at least where I live, there's the rules are a lot different if you're vaccinating. I mean, so I'm meeting with clients, I'm, doing podcasts in person with guests when they're local. Obviously when they're not local, which is most of the time, then we're not doing that. But you mentioned. I think a lot of the things, this is kind of off on a tangent, but I just want to share this with you because I do a lot of business with opioid addiction clinics and companies in the Midwest. And one of the things that my podcast is about rethinking. I like to rethink. It's just kind of what I do some guest lecturing. I really like to be involved in that thought process of what if and the possibilities. And so one of the things that I realize in dealing with this is, why do we call it telemedicine? Because most of the public thinks that means telephone. And it does not. It's virtual counseling. So the naming of that right out of the gate caused people not to want to get into that because it was going to be it wasn't going to connect. It wasn't like as intimate as intimate as a Zoom or a virtual call could be. Now, whether that's as intimate as we want it or not, but it's not a telephone call. So I think there's a lot of education as we move forward to really understand and explain how we can meet virtually. But again, that will never, in my opinion, replace, that face-to-face communication and really picking up on a lot of the body language, like we see from shoulder up, but there's body language all over your body in uncomfortable situations. And so, how do we, like I said, kind of down a rabbit hole there for you, but I think it's kind of interesting because where we're at. So.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting. And I think we there is, I mean, I know I'm juggling. I know that at least two of the people in our office want to stay virtual and one person really wants everybody to come back. And I'm, on the fence here and one person just doesn't care at all. She's happy to be wherever she is.
Yeah.
But I think, there is going to be that idea and I think it will affect the company culture going forward, whatever the decision is, right? It's almost like the decision itself is more important than what we do, the decision-making process or the way we're relating it.
Yeah, I think that's 100% on point. And I think that's even more on point when you really isolate down what culture is because culture is not the actual rules. Culture is the consistency of staying on that. I mean, this is the thing. I'll say this very blatantly. There's no culture expert. There's nobody who can tell you how to create the culture. If somebody's telling you they can sell you something to come in and fix your culture, they just can't. What they can do is stimulate your thought a little bit. Maybe they can recommend some books to read. They can give you real life examples. But at the end of the day, the culture is organic. It changes every day. When you hire a new person, your culture changes. When you remove somebody, your culture changes. When you promote somebody, your culture changes. Every day, your culture changes. Look at the world we live in. And so the whole idea of having a culture is understanding that it's a growing organism. I can't lay it down and impose it on people. It has to be nurtured and built up from the ground if you want to have a culture that everybody buys into. And we know as business leaders, and if we don't have buy-in from our team and our company, then that's a problem. But the key thing to go back to is it's not like, oh, okay, this is what everybody wants as a culture. That's what we're going to do. No, you have a right and a responsibility and a say and a role in that culture. It needs to function within your vision of your company, which, just to go back to it, because I didn't mention it earlier, I mentioned the North Star metric. That's important. But also, if you can't ask all your employees and at least 90% of them can tell you what your company vision is, then you've got a culture problem that you can't even start to worry about culture until people understand what the goals and the mission and the vision of your company is. Right.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. All right. Let's talk about What is actually, just explain fractional sales leadership?
Sure. So fractional sales leadership is one of those things that kind of sounds and is what it sounds like. So what I realized is this is kind of where Read 5 Group stemmed from, is that most of my clients that I dealt with in the healthcare and entertainment space is they they would come to me for help with their marketing strategies. They would come to me with help on dealing with their agencies. They would come to me for a variety of things because we had built some good relationships over the years, and the know, like, and trust factor that we hear about was instilled there. And so the idea, and I'm not the first person to do, there's a lot of companies that do that. Some of them call themselves consultants, etc. I am not a consultant. Because this is hands-on. This is at the working orders of the CEO or the executive team, depending on how it's aligned. But fractional sales leadership and fractional marketing, frankly, is providing a company who doesn't. Let's be honest. If you're going to hire if you're going to hire a revenue manager, a CRM, if you're going to hire a chief marketing officer, you're going to pay, and even a director in those positions, you're going to be paying all in with the total package, probably $150,000 if you want somebody who's proven, embedded, et cetera. And so a lot of companies in the transition, particularly now coming out of COVID, because they had to make some difficult choices, aren't in a position where they can run out and hire that person. So sometimes they look for somebody who's a half of that cost wise. But when you get that, you don't have the experience. So the fractional is giving companies expertise and leadership and insight from somebody who's been there and done that and understands the relationship between sales and marketing. And so it allows them to fractionally employ them, if you will. So for X amount of dollars, probably, again, a fraction of what it would cost to have a full-time person on there, you would get the leadership for your sales team, for your marketing team, et cetera. And immediately people would probably say, I know I would, it'd be a natural thing to be like, well, I want somebody working for me 40 hours a week. Well, I mean, if we want to get in that exercise and look at how many hours are actually worked in that 40-hour week, I think you'd be surprised when you saw that. So,
Oh, yeah.
So to bring somebody on who's accountable for 10 hours a week, and kind of has that conversation on a weekly update, bi-weekly, whatever it is, it just provides you the expertise, the understanding of you've got that, taken care of in the leadership role on your team. And it allows you to kind of build, it's not a permanent thing. It's really there to help allow you to build the bridge to when you can bring in a person who you want to have full time. So that's really what that fractional leadership is about. It's giving you expertise. I mean, you have two choices. You can cut cost and have somebody 40 hours, or you can pay the cost that you need for an expert and cut the hours down. I would argue, and others would argue, that you're going to get better ROI on somebody less hours who really understands how to maneuver in that space and is accountable and efficient in the hours that they're employed for you.
Absolutely. It's focused.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
It's absolutely focused. And we talk about that a lot. We have reduced the hours in our office specifically for that reason, because we looked at it and we're like, so these are the hours that are really just wasted. These are the hours that we're doing things and we're not really accomplishing anything. And we're just here. And wouldn't we rather all be home?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned COVID. I was hesitant to say this. I didn't want to say that, things will never go back to where they were, because they will. But what I'm saying is, I was in Detroit at the time, I think it was 2001, when the auto industry had early 2000s. There was a lot of issues, a lot of layoffs, auto industries were struggling, et cetera. And they didn't go out of business. We could have a conversation of how they got funded, et cetera. But the bottom line is we learn as humans, we learn as businesses how to function within the given guidelines and the framework that we're in. So just because you figure out how to be more efficient, when things get better, you don't go back and bring back the 50 employees you laid off. Unfortunately, you find a way to survive with being more efficient. And I think that's going to happen here. We're just, the positive side, we're going to be better. We're learned from what's happened over the past 18 months, but we've learned to stay productive. We've learned to stay in business. We've done that with some efficiency. So to me, the fractional and all that kind of just fits into running nimbler, running more fluid, running with a little bit less weight dragging us down, so to speak.
Right. You know, one thing that, as you said that, and I think that's absolutely true. One thing that's interesting that we don't talk about is that many of us had to pivot. And
Mm-hmm.
we say we pivoted. The truth is, we didn't leave what we were doing behind.
Right.
We just added something. So people who added a virtual store, an e-commerce store, they
Mm-hmm.
didn't close their shop. They just added an e-commerce store, which is what they wanted to do 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So now everything's opening, and not only do they have their brick and mortar where people are coming in, they still have this virtual store, this e-commerce store. So many of us, if we made it through this, we made it through with an extra stream of income,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And the same thing, we made it through with extra efficiencies, with fewer costs. So there was, for businesses that survived, there was a lot of positive in this
Yeah.
past year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
listen, there was I know people personally who had a heck of a time. I know
Yeah.
people had to shut their doors, in some businesses that were, started long before this happened, but just they couldn't survive in it. So, certainly, I'm aware of that, and I don't. There's no celebration in that whatsoever. But there are
Right.
lessons to be learned, and there are a lot of businesses that flourished and pivoted and did things like that. So, and I don't think that these businesses went out of business because they didn't pivot.
Right.
They just happened to be in a space that you couldn't survive with a lot of the things that happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we only had one client during that time who shuttered. And it was exactly that. There was nothing they could do. They
Right.
tried everything. They did everything. There just was nothing they could do at that point. It
Yeah.
was just such bad timing. It
Yeah.
really was.
Yeah.
Whereas many of us got lucky because we had this break. I started this podcast. We did, there were things that we did just to
Yeah.
survive that all suddenly we're like, oh, well, look at that. We have this.
Yeah. Well,
So,
something again, I love, I really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm going to say this because I do a handful of podcasts. I do a podcast. We pride ourselves in our podcast not to ask the usual questions and check the boxes, something you can find out on Wikipedia about people. And I just love this conversation. I just, not that I'm need to pat you on the back or give you
yeah,
a compliment, but I just really
thank
love this.
you.
It makes me think about some things here. And I think the thing about the fractional side is, and not even if somebody was hiring me to do fractional or anything, if somebody just called me, I always just have a cup of coffee or virtual cup of coffee, whatever, and talk shop a little bit. The bottom line is marketing and sales, and go to marketing for this, right? For small businesses, MBs, whatever, startups, you need to do marketing to drive revenue. So I found a lot of companies were in that space as, man, we need to do marketing. I can either give it to my cousin who's just graduated from college, they know social, or I can go to somebody else who does this, and they're both probably pretty effective. But at the end of the day, we do. I'm a big believer in marketing on the guarantee side, meaning that you shouldn't carry all the risk. So I like to mitigate that, and I think a lot of times we work with companies in the lead gen side where we make sure that they're getting what they want, and not paying for it all up front. And I won't go into that right here, but what I'm saying is, there's reward in helping companies that were trying to navigate this, in helping them without breaking the bank, getting back to business, getting back on track, if you will. So it's very
Right.
fulfilling actually for me as well.
Oh yeah, it really. I mean, we find the same thing, and we
Yeah.
tell people we love our clients more than anybody could love their clients,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel, like I feel their pain as much as they do
Mm-hmm.
when they're struggling, and I feel their joys as much as they do. So
Yeah.
it is, being in the position that you're in or that I'm in. It is rewarding. It's very,
Yeah.
very rewarding. Let's talk about. So one of the things on your list, and we send you a list. We say, what are the things that we should talk about? Shrinking your universe. I'm really curious what this means.
Well, so I focus in the space of fallacies and known truths a lot. I used to coach my kids. I'm not a sports nut, but I like to be involved in my kids' lives, and in their cases, being involved in coaching and stuff was part of it. And so The basics in anything. My son plays tennis in college right now, and shrinking your universe is all about. And again, this is a known truth. This isn't going to be like, oh my gosh, I never heard this. Known truths are about reminding you that you know that, but do you really? Do you just pass it by every day? Do you stop and pause? Do you stop and rethink about what it actually means? So shrinking your universe means, in the example of tennis I'll give you, is that at the end of the day, if you strip it all away, tennis is simply about winning more points than your opponent does, 1 point at a time. Now, to any avid tennis fans out there, they'll know that you could actually lose more points than your opponent and win a match. That can happen. But the general idea is that it's 1 point at a time. You move on to the next one. It's step after step after step. And so shrinking your universe in anything is about understanding exactly what you want is important, but how to get there and shrinking it all down so you can manage it and take steps forward is very important. And again, this isn't like an aha moment, but what it's supposed to do in the idea of it is to say, you know what, I probably am moving too fast. I'm probably going too big. I think I'm going to take about 10 minutes today and think about how I can shrink my universe. And if that happens, that's a win there. So shrinking your universe is part of that culture. It's part of that culture clutter. It's part of just understanding your business. You might want to be I talked to a marketing guy, and he talked about you want to be the best. You might want to be the best at everything, but you can't do that unless you knock out one thing at a time as you go. So that's what this simply means. Again, you've heard it 1,000 times, but it's I think life is full of things that we take for granted, that we think we know, like the basics in a sport, and we don't realize the importance of the discipline to adhering to those basics on a daily basis. So it's just a reminder to think in a universe that you can control.
Yeah. We say eating the elephant, right?
Yeah.
It's how you eat the elephant. When
I like that. That's
a long time ago, I used to run Ironman. And when I started training for it, I had a panic. I just absolutely panicked because I went out for, I think, a 7-mile run. And I was like, how in the world am I going to do this big, long race? How am I going to do it? And it was 6 months down the road. And luckily, my son was at West Point at the time. And somebody had said to him, you get through it one bite at a time. You take one bite at a time to get through it. And I literally wouldn't even look at tomorrow's workout until I'd finished today's workout.
Yeah.
I had it, my coach had given it to me, but I wouldn't look at it because I knew the only way I'm going to get there is one step at a time. And with your business, it's very much the same way. You've got to focus.
Yeah. I will use a sports analogy because this will kind of resonate with some people. And that is, there's a certain point when you're behind so many points. Like if you use a football analogy, you said West Point. I won't go with an Army Navy analogy.
Oh yeah, don't do that.
But my point is if you're too there's a certain point where you're just a lot of points behind, and it's like,
right.
Do you really think that you can come back and win? Who knows? But I know we can't do it unless we just get a first down, score some points. We've got to figure out how to move forward, and then we can see where that goes. But if we're sitting around saying, how are we going to score 35 points in the next 12 minutes, take your shoes off because you're not going anywhere. And so you got to really shrink it down.
Exactly. And I wasn't going to go here, but I'm going to go here real quick and tell you something that happened last week. So I'm in the Goldman Sachs program, the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business. And last week we worked on our growth chart, and we did it to see where we've been and what changed. But it occurs to me that it's also good to look back and go, we're still growing. It's okay. And we had these years that were, like this.
Right.
And we had these years that were like this, and we, some that where we soared and some where we sunk and some where we just stayed flat, and kind of look back at where we are to look at what's next, because we didn't get where we are today in a single day or even a single month or with one single step. It was so many steps to get here.
Yeah.
So I love that. All right. I want you to tell us about your podcast.
Okay. So, the Rethink Marketing podcast, which can be found at Take 5, the number 5, take5thepodcast.com. It's a rethink podcast, meaning that we take a look at everyday fallacies around marketing and sales. the known truths. We really challenge people, and we really want to step out of the echo chamber and kind of rethink things. And so the podcast, we do 6 episodes a month. This is the boring part of it, and then I'll tell you why we like doing it. We do 6 episodes a month. Every Tuesday, my partner and I kind of just talk for about 10 to 12 minutes on a topic that, culture, just a tactic in marketing, whatever, just anything, something that's going on in sales and marketing. We just kind of talk about that. And, if people like it, great. Hopefully it just makes them think about something. And then twice a month, we get, we talk with guests who are pretty significant in business, not just sales and marketing. We've had guests on, like we've had actually Chris Spielman, who's an NFL linebacker, soon to be Hall of Famer, just talking about leadership and just kind of what makes, personal brand. We always tie it back to marketing. And we talk to what we think are A-level marketers like Joe Pulizzi and Tara Hunt and so forth. And we really just kind of want to hear what's ticking in their head and ask them what they're rethinking and just giving input to our audience. So selfishly, I will tell you this, that the podcast for me, and I was talking to my wife about this, like, I don't go on there, these podcasts, pretending I know everything. I'm learning every day. This is like going into graduate class from every day and talking to real sharp people and getting into conversations. And we just hope that the audience likes it. It seems to be well received at this point. We just wrapped up season 1, about 75 episodes in. And next week we have an episode dropping with this Rabbi Daniel Lapin, who's and I didn't know we have a rabbi on our business show, but he's he's a great thinker when it comes to business. He's along the lines of a Dave Ramsey, and so again, it's something I probably never really would have gotten a conversation about, tying business decisions back to old teachings of the ancient past.
Right.
And it's very interesting to see how we're not very different from what we want and from how we need to engage with people, from where we were back in the days of a town crier reading the Hear Ye, Hear Ye. I mean, the same thing is what we all want as businesses, is to engage. There's a lot of lessons from the past that we could learn. So
yeah, I read, my morning reading is the Daily Stoic. There's a little bit of from a Stoic every morning, and I think that too. I'm like, well, this is 1 BC.
Yeah.
This is,
right.
And I just said the same thing to myself yesterday, right? I just had the same thought that he's addressing here, and it still applies. So we're not that different.
Yeah. Technology. Technology changed, but the need, the connection, you couldn't sell way back then if you weren't known, like, and trust. That hasn't changed. All these things. And again, that just goes back to the known truths. They're there, they're staring at you, but are you taking pause and thinking about them? So.
Absolutely. So I looked at your podcast, and one of the ones I saw was about being more human.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that, yes, we have to rethink. I tell people, you don't want to be the mattress guy, right?
Yeah. I agree. I think that was Mark Schaefer, who he's a real and then you also had Brian Kramer, who was an H2H marketing guy. So both of them talked about, the most human company wins. And those are exactly the kind of things that goes right back to culture. That goes to, it's funny how everything is just coming together. I think the best thing that happened for us as a sales and marketing and entrepreneur, startup, just SMB community, is that we did have this time off, everyone to reflect. So what we're getting is this powerful groupthink that has come out from the last 18 months of people sharing a lot of insight. And so, I think there's a lot of good stuff to read out there right now. And I love the human to human stuff, because I just think it's, if you were to ask my daughters who graduated recently within the last 3 years, those kind of things matter to them in their cultures of the companies that they work for. They're very powerful.
They definitely matter. People ask how I got the people I have working for me. I'm like, because I run burgers and bands for suicide prevention. Yeah. They love that cause. That's why they're here. Yes, they love the marketing too, but that cause drew them here.
Yeah.
It makes a difference.
Yeah.
So, I wanted you go back. You said, I'm so sorry I drew a blank, because you said something I wanted to touch on. You know what? So let's move to books, and I'll come back to it. So,
all right.
Did you have a book you want to share with us? Because I pulled one up based on your Rethink Marketing podcast.
Oh, is that right? Well, so I don't have. I do have books, not that I've written, that I would share. there's actually two that I would share. One of them is just to give you a little insight of why I like it. The other one is one I think that people should read.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah,
So
that's fair.
so there's my mother had passed away when I was in high school, and my kids never got to know her, but she left a journal, and there was a book that said, if you ever want to know me, read this Hot Flashes, which my male friends always laugh that I hold a book called Hot Flashes so
Right.
close to me, but so I have that book and I read it often because I just like to kind of wonder and understand. It's almost like it's almost like that movie where everybody came back for the funeral. I think it was Tom Berenger, Jeff Daniels, all those people back in the day.
Oh gosh, what was that? That was The Big Chill.
Yeah, so it's
Yes.
kind of like that, but a group of women was my thought. But it's called Hot Flashes. It's written by Barbara Raskin, and so I just read it. Just I pick random pages and read through it because there's a character that I'm assuming that my mom identified with. So I read it just to kind of me kind of grounded, if you will, or just kind of I can't explain it. It's more just like something I like to have access to and share things with my kids, etc. So
Right.
I like a book that evokes emotions and gets you to rethink and just kind of use your mind a little bit in a personal sense. But on a book that I would recommend to somebody,
Mhm.
and I had to read this. I didn't have to, but I read it because of a guest I was going to interview. It's called I think it's called. There's a long title, but it's Unleash Your Primal Brain. It's Tim Ash, and
Okay.
he's an evolutionary. He's a marketer in the evolutionary psychology space. It's just very interesting because it talks about evolutionary psychology, and I won't insult anybody who's a schooled, educated evolutionary psychologist, but it deals a lot with maybe being pre-wired or hardwired, and so it kind of argues with some traditional psychology. But what's interesting about it, and I think it's a good read, is it really helps you understand about the being human. It really helps you understand about why we might think in ways that we think. And so if we can understand and come to grips that there might be some things that are predetermined that are out of our control, this might help us make better decisions. It was just very interesting takes on a lot of things. So if anybody's looking for a book that's around how your brain works in everyday life and business, I thought that was a good read.
Well, and it sounds like you said you're 53, I'm 52. It sounds like something that is honestly happening in my head right now that I've noticed that kind of aggravates me, and I think probably aggravates those around me. They'll be very frustrated with something, and suddenly I'm finding that I can stop and see, well, wait a second. Are you frustrated with it because of this? Or did that person say that because of this? And I
Yeah.
know they're like, will you shut up and let me be mad at this person?
Yeah. Right.
But I'm thinking through, I think it's just an age. I've gotten a little bit older and suddenly I'm seeing something a little bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Right.
I agree
So,
100%. I agree.
yeah.
And then I
So
always do say that Green Eggs and Ham is the best sales book ever written, if anybody's looking for a sales book. So go ahead.
it is. And I know it by heart.
Yeah.
Because when my 27-year-old was a baby, he was a very weird baby. And if he'd been fed and he'd had his diaper change and he was still crying, all I'd have to do is quote Green Eggs and Ham and he would stop. So he could be in the car, we could be in traffic, he'd be screaming, and I would just quote the book to him and he would stop crying. It was the best thing ever.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
all right. So this is the book I pulled up because your podcast is called Rethink Marketing. And it's called Think Again by Adam Grant. Have you read it yet?
I haven't. I know Adam. I don't know him personally, but I know of Adam Grant.
I think this is so far the best thing I've read by him. It is, it's interesting. I started reading it about a week ago. It's interesting because it has made me slow down my thinking.
Okay.
And stop just assuming that I know the right thing. And which is a big deal for me because I feel like well, my family calls me the send it lady.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, it's done. It's good. Send it.
Right.
And so this has made me stop and say, well, is it good? Can I send it? Should I send it? It's a good book. It's a good book. So this was great. I love having a conversation. And I agree with you about your podcast, about my podcast.
Yeah.
I would have never had this conversation with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And
It just kind of,
yeah.
it goes where it goes.
Exactly. And I remember that thing that I was going to say to you. You were talking about, well, let me say the thing. So I've been thinking a lot about how you talk to a person who's a client and you say, tell me about your competitors. And probably 1 out of 10 times they'll say, oh, I don't think about my competitors. And what I realized that we do at ASMM and you're doing with your podcast and I'm doing my podcast, but also what we do with Burgers and Bands is we don't think of our competitors as competitors anymore. We think of them as strategic partners, people we can learn from.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes I'm sending them business, sometimes they're sending me business, but mostly we're learning from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a very, very powerful thing. So I loved that was it. When you were talking about shrinking the universe, it was the thing I thought about is that we're really not in competition with people.
No.
We're really in the universe as human beings with them.
Yeah. I mean, you're gonna have somebody that you will compete with, but competition, like an embedded competition, is different than competing with somebody, for a certain business, if you want. And it's not a negative term. It just means that you're not the only option.
Right, exactly. And for us, we've decided that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
We will literally introduce our clients to other marketers because especially if we think that they're going to do a better job than we are.
Yeah.
I want you to have a good experience. So I'm going to introduce you to the person who's going to work best for you.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point. It's about the value of the service as opposed to the sale, actually.
Absolutely. Well, this was wonderful. You stick around. I want to remind people, and actually you stay right there. I usually take people off screen while we do this. So what I want to remind them of is to subscribe. So you guys can subscribe on youtube.com for Brennan and Annie. That's me. And you can follow our podcast there. It would help me out because my kids think I'm a nerd because I still haven't hit 1,000 subscribers. So do that. But also, wherever you're listening to podcasts, please do subscribe. I just subscribed, as a matter of fact, to the Take 5 podcast. If you go there, it says the take5podcast.com. You can subscribe. It's also the Rethink podcast. Did I miss anything there with your podcast?
No. Well, I'll just say this, that we have a ridiculously long URL. And so we redirect all kinds of things to the site. So it's easiest to save your fingers some typing just by take 5, the number 5, thepodcast.com.
Yeah. And I will tell you, you've got your URL or your SEO is great because I found you just like that.
Oh, excellent.
It
Great.
was very, very quick to find you. So please do subscribe. I am excited about listening to it. I think it's going to be great. And I looked at some of your guests. You're right. You have really top-notch guests. So people should subscribe. But again, if you want to leave a review for this podcast, we want to know how we're doing. So let us know. You can leave a review anywhere you listen to the podcast, and we'd appreciate that. Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody. We will see you next week.